All right, we are live. This is Masterclass number 1, and I am so excited to introduce Emily, who is going to do our training on time management and boundaries. So with that, Emily, I'll let you take it away and introduce yourself and share your magic.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it. And this is primarily going to be a presentation on time management and boundaries, which are two of the pillars of burnout management, which I will get into more in a moment after I introduce myself. So this is me. This is just a small representation of my time here in Chicago. I'm from California, moved to Seattle for my undergraduate degree, and then moved to Chicago to get my master's. My undergraduate degree is in psychology and business, and I was a career counselor during my time in undergrad. For graduate school, I got my master's in industrial organizational psychology, which nobody really knows about, but essentially it's an MBA with a psychology emphasis. If you've ever had interest in psych and you're not sure what you want to do as far as lucrative career paths, because sometimes that's honestly a toss-up, I highly recommend IO. It's very diverse. And then as far as corporate experience, I worked in HR and recruiting for a while, and then I transitioned over to training and development, and I did those at Rotary International, which some of you may have heard of, and their primary gig is curing polio. And then I coached through BetterUp, so I coached through an online coaching platform, which essentially hires coaches and then has them meet with other companies who don't have on-site coaches but would like their employees to have that option. And then I worked in organizational development and change management, which was super sexy, but didn't really hold my attention all the time. So I switched over to corporate workshop creation and facilitation, which I absolutely fell in love with. And that was at Bosch. They make tools, but I worked in the organizational development department. And then just some fun facts. The first is that I listen to an audiobook a week on 2 times speed, which is kind of traumatic. If anybody just walks in, you have to really be in the zone to listen to it, but I try to use my time as succinctly as possible. And then I have been a vegetarian since I was 6, and I lived in Spain for 6 months. In case anyone has been to Europe, Spain is a fantastic place. I was in the Basque Country. So that's a little bit about me. And then I created my burnout management program because from 2017 to 2019, I was working full-time. I was coaching part-time, about 15 hours a week. I was in graduate classes in person, full-time, 3 hours, 3 nights during the week. I was commuting 2 to 3 hours per day, so I would walk a mile through Chicago downtown, which was not always the safest. I would train for an hour, wait for a bus, and then take the bus to work. And then I was doing homework on the weekends and creating coaching materials every day, trying to maintain my relationship and my health, and trying not to actively destroy friendships with people who were not as burnt out and tired as I was and didn't get it, but it also wasn't their fault. They were just trying to be good friends. So I'm sure some people can relate to feeling that way sometimes. And in 2019, I hit my breaking point. It was heavier than I had ever been. I never slept. I would wake up anxious like 3 or 4 times a night, just stressed about life in general. And I never had time for myself. And I always put achievement over myself. So I was basically a ticking time bomb. And as a result, I created the burnout management program to sustainably manage my burnout. And I'm going to teach you 2 of those tools today. So below is a visual representation of the most useful tools at your disposal when it comes to maintaining your highest quality life. I don't actually watch football, but I thought that this was a good image just to kind of represent how it feels when life is over here on the left, and then you are over here on the right with your ideal life, which is the ball that you're protecting. And all these tools stand in between life happening, like there being a shitstorm, and then you internalizing it and it actually impacting the quality of your life. And these things are mindset, your habits, your personal care, time management, stress management, boundaries, and social support. And we are going to talk about time management and boundaries in particular. So we're going to start with time management, and then when we get to the end of time management portion, there is time for questions. And then at the end of the boundaries portion, you can also ask questions. Or if you just have any questions at any point, also feel free. So for time management, it's a multi-million-dollar industry. There are more books on time management than anybody has time to read, but everything trickles down to having the ability to coordinate and having discipline. You can have all of the right ideas, goals, intentions, resources, people, but if you cannot coordinate the chaos of what's going on and do what you need to when the time comes, then you will struggle with absolutely everything else. All you need is coordination and discipline. So the areas that I'm going to offer time management solutions are at work and on the weekends. So coordination at work, beginning here. You sit down to a busy day with a variety of tasks. What do you do? What do you start with? So the first thing that you should be doing almost anytime you sit down is decide what your priorities are. So I call it a staff meeting. I have a staff meeting with me, myself, and I every morning, and I sit down and determine what are my 2 to 3 priorities. If I could only do 2 or 3 things today, what would those things be? And then primarily focus on that, get my resources ready for that. And then and I'm going to dive into these a little bit more in a moment so you have some more context. But first you're going to prioritize, and then you're going to preserve yourself. So this is the step that most people skip, that is actually part of the reason that you're able to actually execute on your priorities. And this is saying, what do you need in order to work best? So not just what work do you need to do, but what do you need to actually work best? So you're preserving your energy and your decision budget. And we all have decision budgets. I don't know if you guys know who Dave Asprey is, but he's the founder of the Bulletproof Diet, and he has a portion in his book called Game Changers where he talks about we actually cognitively have a decision budget throughout the day. And as the day goes on, we have less capacity to make straining decisions. And that is why normally at the end of the day, people end up like caving on their diets, fighting when they're having hard conversations, all of that stuff. There have been studies done where judges who were given appeals in the beginning of the day were more likely to pass an appeal than if like an inmate was applying for, I don't know all the correct terminology, but was applying for an appeal later on in the day. So there's been studies to show your energy, your decision budget do wane throughout the day. And then set deadlines. Deadlines are insurance that you're managing your time well. If you know how long something should take and it's for some reason taking you way longer than you anticipated it should, something needs to be looked at because you don't have to live your whole life that way. Things can constantly be trialed and errored. So we're going to jump into each of these a little bit more. So the coordination, you sit down, busy day, variety of tasks. The first thing you're going to do is prioritizing. And these two matrices, they rely on each other, but the Stephen Covey matrix is this matrix here where you can see that importance and urgency of tasks are in this little grid. So if something is urgent and important, it's a crisis. And then you can look at the Eisenhower matrix here to the right, and that means that you do that task. If something is urgent but not important, this means somebody just burst into your space and they're letting you know that they have something that's pressing and they would like your help. It's urgent, but it's not as important. And that's something that can be set to the side. And you just ask, okay, what is the actual due date for this? All right, then I will get to it. Thank you. And then you move back to your priorities. As far as non-urgent and important, these are extremely important tasks. This is the goals and planning, and the people who constantly focus on the crises and the urgency and importance, they miss out on the opportunities for growth, because here in this important but non-urgent portion is where people who end up being in the top of their industry, they lock themselves in a room at least once a week. They make sure that they take the time to make sure they're growing and developing, and they have a strategy and a plan for all of the effort that they're putting forward in different areas of their life. They're not just focusing on crisis after crisis, but staying exactly where they are. They're making sure they have this ultimate plan. And then as far as non-important and non-urgent, these are distractions. And these are things that if you look at the Eisenhower matrix, you want to eliminate. So these map across, you want to execute on crises, plan, goals and planning for non-urgent, important, delegate interruptions as much as you possibly can, and then eliminate non-urgent, non-important. And an underrated key to coordinating is how you organize your time and tasks. So to-do lists are great, but they lack a sense of focus. So the two options that my clients have found most useful and that have just traditionally been utilized both in offices and in your leisure time to be the most focused and kind of hold you accountable to how you're using your time is first, calendar blocking. So when you block off your Outlook calendar, you know exactly what you're working on, when you're working on it, when you anticipate being done, and other people, especially in the office place, can see that you're not free for interruption if they're looking to book a meeting with you. This is additionally helpful if you know when your best work is done on various topics. So for example, I know I'm most creative in the mornings, and I'm most social in the afternoon. So I make sure that meetings can be in the afternoon, creativity can be in the morning. And while I can switch those, you're not going to get the best work out of me. And that's what you should also know about yourself is when do you do different things best and work around that because it makes a difference. And then we want to be in the habit of working when you're most productive and listening to your body if your body is suffering. So there are times during most people's careers where they're sitting at their desk and they're like, oh my God, I need to go home. Like I'm so like, I'm not engaged. I'm not doing my best work. I would do better work if I could just go home and then later on power through like 2 hours. I would get so much more done. Or some people work best at like 9 p.m. And the traditional office setting of 9 to 5 does not necessarily cater to people who have strong productivity hours outside of that range, which is unfortunately something I can't address like in this span of my life, but eventually plan on bringing down that 9 to 5 culture. So try and figure out when works best for you. And if you do have the flexibility, take some of that work home and work on in areas like periods of time that you are more productive and utilize the time that you would have been sitting at work but not being productive on something else if you have that flexibility. And then this is the modernized to-do list. This is what I use, and it is a to-do list and a shit list. And these two lists are next to each other. And does somebody have a question? I don't think so. Okay, let me know if you do. So I keep two lists, and the first is to do, and these are the actually critical, super important, must complete. And the shit list, that's items that are also important. You do need to get done, but if they don't get done, you can cut yourself a little slack and they're not absolute must execute on today. And to be able to focus on 2 to 3 items without bouncing back and forth is going to greatly improve your focus. Now, preserving your energy. You're sitting down to this busy day, variety of tasks. First, you prioritize them like we talked about above, and then you preserve yourself. So this is just what conditions allow you to perform your best, and how can you avoid distraction to complete each task as quickly and with the highest quality possible. So for some people, this looks like working in a private place, stepping away from your desk. Maybe as soon as you sit at your desk, you get interruptions every 5 minutes. This might be putting headphones in. Maybe you work best when music is playing, or you work best if it's silent, whatever works for you. Blocking off your calendar, taking breaks every 30 to 50 minutes, having snacks every 2 hours, what works best for you, because not everybody works the same. And then planning. So you're sitting down, prioritize, preserve, and then you're going to set those deadlines. So I recommend that because a lot of people have trouble procrastinating, that deadlines create the pressure that is needed to get the ball rolling. So I recommend gamification, deadlines, and rewards that can reduce the risk of procrastination, phone breaks, or overworking because you aren't focused. So the question that I ask when I'm setting a deadline is, how long should this take? And then I set a timer for approximately that time, and I take breaks every 50 minutes because that's been found to be, it keeps your blood flowing, it keeps you focused. And in the book, High Performance Habits, the author of it highly recommends every time your butt hits a chair, every 50 minutes, you should be getting up and stretching. And then special important note, you're not supposed to go on your phone for breaks, because this is a time to check out, not check into something else. And if you have been working really hard, that's just like a hit of dopamine, of distraction that can suck you in, and then suddenly 20 minutes has passed. So I highly recommend designating social media hour, like putting all of the apps that distract you into a certain app, and then putting that app like 3 pages deep, so you have to swipe quite a bit to get to it, and knowing you're going to be on those apps for 1 hour at the end of the day, and that way it's not just sprinkled all throughout your day. Now, threats to planning, threats to even getting to sit down, have that staff meeting, prioritize, decide what you need, and setting those deadlines. These are threats that most people experience. So the first is email and low-hanging fruit. So the recommendation, if you often get distracted by email, you're somebody who keeps your email open at all times, we are very distractible creatures. As soon as you get a ping, our subconscious mind is going to start paying attention to that, and we experience cognitive clutter, and our short-term memory starts to kind of space out because we're thinking about other things, or if your phone is lighting up. And the more you jump back and forth between tasks, the more you're losing focus and time that you could spend being productive or in flow. So identify your most valuable outputs in your role and what makes the biggest difference, and then prioritize those over dropping your focus anytime an email or something comes in, or anytime you get a task that you're like, oh, I could just knock that out really quick. I can knock that out in 5 minutes. Set a designated time that you do all of those little tasks that end up going on your shit list that you end up just making a note of, and you can knock all those out in one span of time, but you don't want to use that as a cognitive break between a different task, because it will take longer for you to get back on task for the original one. For the attention span, again, set a timer every 50 minutes at a minimum. Get as much done as humanly possible in those 50 minutes. And if that's too long for you, then you can use the Pomodoro method, which is 30 minutes on, 5 minutes off. If you experience a lot of pressure and anxiety, and when it does come to being really busy or managing your time, the options seem like have like just complete shutdown, or like hopefully there's something that's clearly the priority. But in any of these situations, just understand that the stress or lack of stress is not going to change what you're doing. So I recommend taking a box breath, which is 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold, and then upholding a mantra and taking care of yourself in other ways throughout that day as well. So when I say upholding a mantra, I mean when I get really in my head and stress out, I tell myself, I take a deep breath, and then I tell myself, like, life is not that serious. It's going to be okay. Just do your best. And that reminds me that I'm taking my life way too seriously. This email is not that serious. I can deal with it. I'm just going to do the best I can. And so it's knowing what you need to hear and being kind of your own friend that pops up and holds you accountable to your calmer, better self. And then procrastinating, I recommend gamification, which is making a game out of whatever it is you're doing. So if I do this really well, then I get to go talk to my friend for 10 minutes. If I finish all of these emails, then I'm going to buy those pants on Lululemon, like whatever it is, but using gamification, and then rewards and deadlines again. And then for perfectionism, I ask, what is the bare minimum that you could do? And then once you've done that, not letting your perfectionism run wild. So conveying valuable information, and then getting in the habit of just being okay with submitting the valuable information and not completely personalizing it, making it above and beyond, and trusting that if they need that, they would ask for it, and that is not a good reason to just delay and end up procrastinating. And then for multitasking, there's no such thing as multitasking cognitive tasks. It's been proven again and again in studies. While you can watch a TV show and do laundry, because that's one cognitive task and one physical task, you cannot actually do 2 cognitive tasks at a time. Something is always being compromised. That's why things like talking on the phone and driving are still dangerous, because those are 2 tasks where they'd be competing for cognitive attention. And then inability to pause. So this is for people who, as soon as somebody walks up to them and asks, hey, can you do this? You just say yes automatically. It's your first response. It's like, yeah, of course. Let me just like put it on my list, or let me find a way to help you. It is completely understandable to take a second and pause and tell somebody like, hey, I need to look at my calendar or my to-do list before accepting, but can I get back to you at 1 p.m. and just creating that little phrase, whatever it might be for you, that allows you to take a pause before agreeing to things and really evaluate, do I have the capacity to help here? Can I really contribute? And again, quality over quantity. We're you just want to strive overall for everything in your life with quality over quantity. It's really easy to have a million acquaintances. It's much more valuable to have a couple close friends, things of that nature. Now, time savers. And I know I'm talking fast. I'm sorry. I want to make sure that I pump this in here and you guys can get as much as possible. So, time savers. Batching, which is doing all light tasks at a time. This might mean you only answer emails once or twice a day. Maybe you answer them at noon and you answer them at 3 so that you chunk all of that. You don't spend a bunch of time doing those at different times, just popping in all the time. Scheduling, so doing the same tasks at scheduled times to reduce threats. If you have to submit invoices, technically once a week, but you usually just put them off, and then it's this huge thing. Instead, try doing small pieces of it, 30 minutes every day while you're drinking your coffee. That's just what you do for a little chunk of time in the beginning of the day at the same time every day while you're doing whatever else, and assigning things that are sometimes daunting just a specific time and knocking it out. And then identify and remove bottlenecks. So I'm sure when you think of your role or you think of things that you do regularly, you can find delays in your processes and things that could definitely be working better or smoother. And it's identifying those bottlenecks, seeing if there is a workaround, or even talking to the people who are bottlenecks and seeing if you can brainstorm a solution together. But that has the potential to waste a lot of your time or waiting around for other things that time could be spent better on probably a couple people's ends. Turning off your notifications, so your emails and any notifications on your phone, because those are really easy ways to get distracted. And you want to be going into these apps on purpose. You want to go into Instagram because you want to enjoy yourself for 10 minutes, you want to reply to people, and then you're going to get off, not just because you got a notification. Apps are designed to be addictive. People have gotten so good at preying on human nature to enjoy connecting and being on these social sites and having exciting things to look at and pretty things to look at, that we've completely lost sight of the fact that we're buying into exactly what they want us to be buying into, which is turning on and being addicted to their apps anytime that they want. That being said, I still use them, but just know that they're very smart in how they design them. And then having go-to responses. So rather than worrying about how you're going to say no every time somebody asks for something that you might not be able to give them the time for, just have an automatic response ready for tasks or people that you cannot support. And then outsourcing. I'm a huge fan of paying somebody else to do something that I would otherwise have to do that I don't really love. I'm sure you guys know Rachel Hollis. She wrote the book Girl, Wash Your Face and Girl, Stop Apologizing. And she wrote in an article that her and her husband always fought over doing the dishes. Like, both of them hated, or maybe it was just cleaning in general. They both hated cleaning. And so no matter what happened, no matter where else they had to budget, they made sure they hired a cleaner because it alleviated pressure in their marriage and it made them both happier people. And that was worth outsourcing for them rather than having to have that tension. And that is where outsourcing can be valuable. It can also be valuable if you don't have time to walk the dogs, to go get the groceries. You want to order them in. You want to send your laundry out, whatever it may be. You want to utilize outsourcing where possible when it does make your life easier. And then delegating, so redirecting work to somebody else. I delegate lots of things to my fiance, especially dishes because I don't like them. And then automating, so creating an alternative reduced effort solution to a repeating to-do item. So anytime you're saying, oh, every time I have to explain what blah, blah, blah is to people, that's an opportunity to create a training, create a handout, train somebody else to explain it, try and find a way to get that item off your task because it is repetitive. And then again, knowing your biological patterns. So coordinating with your natural energy fluctuation when you are coordinating your day. And then time management on the weekend. So on the weekend, it's easy to feel like everything's just a free-for-all. There's no set plans, everybody's home. And a lot of why weekends can be tough on people because they're not exactly restful enough, but they're not enough time to get the rest of your life together. A lot of that can be related back to America's overindulgence culture, where we restrict and then bend with limited sustainable balance. And the solution here is to again have a staff meeting with yourself in the morning to establish your top priorities in each of these 3 following areas. You're going to choose just 1 to 2 things in each of the following areas to make sure that you're having a balanced weekend. The first area is maintenance. So these are things that keep you functioning to the best of your ability. They're not particularly fun, but they are necessary. So this is having 7 to 9 hours of sleep. So maybe you make sure you have extra sleep, fueling food, water, active at least 20 minutes, grocery shopping, flossing, shaving, cutting your nails, cleaning, laundry. This is things around the house, things physically, things that you just need to take care of. And a lot of times people will spend all day doing maintenance, all day cleaning, and then not get the chance to do the rest of this. So the next category is refill. And this is rejuvenating and provides more relief and joy than just maintenance. So this is shopping, getting your nails done, spending time with friends, spending time with family, spending time with a partner, cooking, baking, fun activity, going out to eat, traveling, seeing a movie. This is actually having fun. And then this last category, rest. These are things that actually allow you to turn your mind and body off and rest. And this might be taking a nap, meditating, journaling, listening to an audiobook, going on a walk, yoga or stretching, cuddling a pet, taking a bath, taking a shower, sitting in the car, whatever it is for however long it is. You need to be doing at least one of each of these things. It is really easy to accidentally overdo one of them, to rest the whole weekend, spend the entire weekend watching Netflix, to refill the whole weekend, to spend the whole weekend socializing and having fun with friends, and then suddenly it's Sunday night and you haven't done any rest or prep for the week ahead. Or like I said, maintenance before. It's easy to clean the whole house and then still not be rested. So these are the 3 areas that I always evaluate every weekend morning to make sure I'm getting enough of each. And that is the time management portion. I knew we flew through that, but does anybody have any questions on time management before we jump into boundaries? And I'll open this little thing again.
That was awesome. You guys who are here live, feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question, or if you would rather me say your question, you can put it in the chat box. I had a couple. You mentioned a couple slides ago about having a go-to response for things that we just really can't take on. Do you have a couple examples of those? I feel like that's something that we could all benefit from, kind of having a knee-jerk, polite thing to not just say yes right away.
Yeah, definitely. So I have a list and I can get you the actual list, but a lot of things that I use are, is it okay if I get back to you after I check my calendar? Or I won't have the capacity to do that this week. Can I talk to you about doing it next week? Or letting them know if I think there is a better alternative resource. So I might not have capacity to handle this, but I recommend speaking to this person. They might have some information on it. And yeah, it definitely depends on the circumstance you're in, but I can get you a list of more, because I have it categorized out into like different situations you might be using it. So I'll send that to you guys so you have it.
That would be awesome. Thank you. I think that would be really helpful. And something else, this is less a question than just something that I was thinking as you were talking, when you were talking about setting deadlines for things to you guys, clients who are listening to this. I think that's a great idea for the weekly sort of success framework tasks, like planning your meals, writing your grocery list, finding new recipes. That's something that can easily take as long as you allow it to, especially if you kind of go down the rabbit hole on Pinterest or, you know, whatever websites. But if you set a goal for yourself, okay, in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to do A, B, and C, you can get it done in that time. And I think it would feel a lot less daunting if you know that it has a cap on it, and are kind of incentivized to do it quickly, especially with, I love the breakdown of the 3 kind of buckets over the weekend, is if you stay on task with those maintenance tasks to like get yourself ready for the upcoming week, then you have more time for the fun stuff or the restorative stuff. That was really a great way to look at it for me.
Thanks. Yeah. I like what you said, that like I think there's a quote that goes along with it, but like the time a task takes will flex with the amount of time you have to do it. And I'm trying to remember, I feel like there's a book that talks about that a lot, but It's true. If you have an hour to crank something out, you'll make it happen. And if you have 6 hours, you can probably make it last 6 hours too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, I haven't seen any questions come in, so let's move on to boundaries.
Awesome. So, click on it. First of all, we'll just start with, what is a boundary? A boundary is where you end and other people begin. It is knowing what is your responsibility and what is not your responsibility, and then being able to act accordingly consistently. And this can be really difficult because in our culture and in our society, we receive a lot of messages from really young that boundaries can be bad. Saying no in response to being asked to do things can be bad. And so we'll talk about that more later, but just know that it's where you end and other people begin. Now, a boundary is essentially creating a bubble around what is actually your responsibility, and I'm going to elaborate on that. Your feelings are your responsibility. Even if somebody else does something, if it makes you angry, that anger is your responsibility. It's not the other person's responsibility. The other person can experience a natural consequence because of your anger, but the anger itself and mediating it is yours. Your thoughts are your responsibility. Your actions are your responsibility. Your daily experiences are your responsibility. And your exposure to others is your responsibility. Not your responsibility is other people's feelings, other people's thoughts, other people's behaviors, other people's experiences, and other people's natural consequences. I'm a huge proponent of natural consequences. I think if somebody really needs to fail, really needs to suffer a little bit in order to get, suffering sounds like a really negative word, but they need to experience the natural consequence of something not going their way because they didn't execute on time or whatever it may be, that is something that's going to teach them more so than other people taking responsibility for them. So why are boundaries hard for a lot of people? We receive messages from a really, really young age, often by family and friends who do have the best intentions, but the boundaries are bad. And this can sound like, you should go to their birthday party or it'll hurt their feelings. When you fight with your siblings, it hurts mommy's feelings. What will people think if you do that? And what we internalize with these messages, despite when people do mean well, is that other people's feelings and thoughts are my responsibility. And worse, we think that other people's feelings and thoughts are within our control, and it's up to our performance as human beings to make other people comfortable and happy all the time. And then people become people-pleasing perfectionists because they believe if they're good enough and if they make enough people happy, then they're doing everything correctly, and that's totally within their control, when in reality, everybody else is their own responsibility. And a lot of times your responsibility is just to show up and deliver the message. How they take it is their responsibility. Now, people-pleasing versus perfectionism. People-pleasing is sacrificing your own comfort and preferences for other people's comfort and preferences, commonly learned from people in our lives rejecting or responding with anger or sadness when we make decisions that did not favor what they wanted to do. And this thought can sound like, I wouldn't want to make them uncomfortable or damage the relationship. And the alternative is hearing out what people ask for, evaluating your resources and desire to partake in whatever it is, and then responding accordingly. And then perfectionism is pressing fear that what we are producing isn't good enough, and it's commonly learned from equating perfectionism and good behavior with love and connection in childhood. When I get good grades, I get praise and love. When I get bad grades, when I don't do my chores, when I don't do something right, I get disconnection, I get ignored, I don't get love. When I do everything right, people like me, I get love and affection. When I perform poorly, I lose love and connection. And an alternative is doing work to meet the standard, personalizing it if it's called for, and then understanding that we are worthy of love, affection, connection, and appraisal, even if we do not meet this elusive bar of perfection that we know we're expecting for ourselves, but other people are probably not even expecting from us because they're worried enough about themselves. So what do good boundaries look like? I'm going to illustrate this with a story. So there was a woman who started as a part-time assistant The director that she was working for came by and handed her her work. She went into his office shortly after and told him with a kind smile, "You've got a problem. I was hired to work 20 hours per week and you just handed me about 40 hours of work. Which half would you like me to do?" And he listened, chuckled, went back through it, and identified the top priorities that would fit in the 20 hours. If she finished early, she could always go in and grab more. And this is just to illustrate that a majority of boundary setting is pointing out the obvious. And it's not personal, it is the reality of resources. Most boundaries are set because one of our resources is being exploited, and a lot of times the other person might just not know it. And so it is our responsibility to deliver that message and let them know, hey, I got 20 hours. This is 40 hours of work. I can only do what I can do. So I ask you, where are boundaries hardest for you? Is it work and colleagues? Is it home and family? Is it partner and dating relationships? Is it with friends? And this is a tell that this may be an insecure area for you. The area that you struggle to set boundaries in is often your inner child acting up because it feels vulnerable, risking that relationship or risking that setting or whatever it may be in order for you to set a boundary for your own need. Especially if you're a people pleaser, it can seem like your needs are the things that go on the back burner first so that you can keep the peace for everyone else. But in reality, if you're not taking care of yourself, you cannot take care of anybody else or anything else, especially without growing resentful. Creating a boundary is not helping others anymore. It's being able to help others without resentment because you are creating the time to take care of yourself. And you have to believe that boundaries do not make you harder to like, love, be with, or work with. And this is just personally, and nothing draws me to a person more than if they can draw that boundary with respect and grace. And I know how valuable their time is once they've made it clear that they value their time. And a lot of times in life, we are worried to set boundaries because we're worried about how it will come across. But I'd be more so worried about always being available, always teaching people, because you're constantly teaching people how to treat you, teaching people that I am there at their beck and call. And if I'm not there, then they have the right to be upset with me or disappointed with me because my resource is at their disposal. That's not how it works. That's not how being able to maintain yourself works. Your resources are not always at other people's disposal. It's up to you to decide, what resources do I have? What do I need to keep myself functioning? And then what do I need to give in each of these buckets in order to have the high quality life that I want and the high quality relationships that I want? Not just, it's a free-for-all, whoever can grab the most first gets it. It needs to be coordinated and disciplined, again, just like time management. Now, boundaries as insurance, and this little house image will make sense in a moment. Boundaries are insurance that other people's problems do not become our problems. If you have a manager or colleague who regularly comes to you expecting you to meet their panic, they come at you with this really chaotic energy and to take on some of their responsibility, your train of thought needs to go from, oh shit, to your poor time management does not warrant panic from me. So I know that one of my aunts will call my mom constantly, just in a complete panic. And it's been a really hard lesson for her to learn that, just because somebody calls me in a panic doesn't mean I need to meet their panic. It means that, I have to be even more strict about my boundaries to make sure I can either influence them with my calm, or that they know that I am not the harbor of their panic. I need to create this boundary so it's insurance that my life isn't being impacted by other people's inability to either manage their time or manage a relationship or manage something else, because that is their responsibility and they need to experience that natural consequence in order to make the changes that they need to make for their own life. Otherwise, you will spend your life being responsible for other people's lives. Now, setting limits. Setting limits for others is an illusion, and we can only set limits on ourselves and our exposure to others, and you cannot control or change other people. Our behavior towards them can change, and they can choose to change as a response. You can raise or make your standards clear, and this might sound like you can act like that, but it's not welcome in my house. And that's where the house image comes in. But that's more so symbolic, because I don't know how often we use this phrase particularly, but that's to say, if you have a friend who's extremely negative, all they have to say is negative or critical, and they start criticizing someone or something, and you've just had it. anytime they start to do this, you can just excuse yourself, or you can let them know kindly. I don't know if you realize this, but when you start talking about this, you get into a really critical place, and I just don't have the capacity to manage that right now. If like, as soon as you're done, like if you need to get it out, you can get it out, but when you're done, I'll come back. But like for the time being, I just need to take a step away. And that's not you crapping on your friend. That's not you saying anything unreasonable. That's you letting them know the natural consequence of you talking about this is that it's impacting my life. So I'm taking a step away. So you can not talk about it, and like, then we can spend this time together, or XYZ. And then we create the internal structure that preserves our assets. Again, it's not a free-for-all. It's not whoever can grab the most. Oh, my manager gets in first. He asks for XYZ. That means he gets all my energy for the day, when you really know you have other things that you need to be doing for other things. Maybe there's just less of a pressure. Whatever it may be, you're creating that internal structure. Now, common boundary problems, and these, of course, develop in childhood because everything happens in childhood. There are 4 types. The first is compliant. Compliant boundary type are people who are chameleons. They don't like pushing or stirring the pot, and they learn that saying no is bad early on out of fear. So if they do say no to people or things, then their conscience punishes them. They guilt themselves into a lot of situations where they have to give up a boundary. And then avoidant. So saying no to the good and don't let support in. They shut down thinking my problem is nothing compared to yours. They do not let that help in without them telling themselves, like, you know what, no, I should be stronger than this. I should be better than this. My problem is not as bad as theirs. I'm not going to ask for that support. And then controllers are people who push people, and they think that no is a challenge, and they resist taking responsibility. Sometimes they bully others to get what they want or need. And something that I do want to say about controllers is that a lot of times they don't realize it doesn't have to be completely malicious. A lot of the wording in here is kind of negative, and I took it from a book, so I'm not going to say that, maybe the book meant to be a little bit more malicious, but I have met a good amount of controllers. I'm friends with a good amount of controllers who I can still be friends with. I just have to be really strong about my boundaries, because they're not afraid to ask for things. And there are some people in life who are not afraid to ask for things, and who hear no and they think, I bet if I tried harder, then it would work out. And for some people that works. For a lot of people, especially if you're compliant, that doesn't work. So different combinations of these are going to breed very different results. And then non-responsives. So these people have a critical spirit towards other people's needs, and this comes from rejection of their own needs. And they hate being incomplete within themselves, so they reject the needs of others as well. These are a lot of kids who probably had to take care of themselves, who got really tough really quick. And when other people need things, it kind of feels like, what, how dare they? Like, how dare they need things so openly when I was never allowed to need things so openly, or I never got support when I needed things so openly. And you can kind of start to reflect on how you feel in different situations, how the people in your life act that you're closest to and spend the most time around, so you can begin to categorize them and understand why they might be doing what they're doing and put more language behind it. And then we have 2 boundary types before we get a little bit more into the technical side of setting a boundary. So the first is relational boundaries. These are interpersonal. This is between you and another person. And then we have functional boundaries, and these are task-based boundaries between you and an experience. So while a relational boundary are all of the examples we've talked about before, a functional boundary might be like, I spend way too much time on my phone. I need to create a functional boundary. I'm deleting all my apps for a week. I think it would be healthy for me. This might be something that has to do with, I'm spending way too long at the gym. I get an hour in and out, and then I got to be out of there. Or like, it might have to do with, I'm not going to keep certain snacks in the house. Whatever it may be, whatever area it falls into, a functional boundary is between you and an experience or something that's going on. And then when do you need to set a boundary? So when is a boundary required as opposed to just some kind of open conversation? The first is when trying isn't working. So energy you're expending seems wasted. So this might be your manager keeps giving you more work despite you telling them that you're at capacity. If your words are just landing on deaf ears, then it might be your turn to set a boundary as far as functionally. You might tell them, okay, as soon as my 40 hours is up, I'm leaving. Regardless of how much work you give me, this is the time I need to go. And really that's their expectation for you. So saying it out loud is, again, just reinforcing how many resources you really do have. You need to set a boundary when you're just being nice out of fear and people pleasing, but ultimately one of your resources is being violated. So if your significant other depends on you for their caretaking and you don't want to pull back out of fear of withdrawal or love. So a lot of women have been kind of taught that you can, if you're as easy as you can make yourself to love is kind of who you pretend to be in the beginning of a relationship. And then time passes and you're like, I need some help. Like, I'm not this easy to love. I have needs too. I have things that I need to get done. And then you're conflicted between, do I suddenly have all of these needs and like suddenly give them all these chores that I was doing before? Do I suddenly stop making dinner? Do I like suddenly, I don't want them to think now I'm a different person. Does it jeopardize the relationship? This happens a lot. I've talked to a lot of clients about this, so that's why I have a lot of context on it. But ultimately, you are still going to have that conversation where you let them know, this is the resources that I have. These are the things I don't have resources for. I know that we might not have had this conversation before or might not have been worded this way, but this is what I need help with. This is what I do have the capacity to do. Let's find a way to work together to figure this out. And then taking responsibility for others. This is huge. So say a semi-toxic friend calls about the same life problem every week, and you often don't have the capacity to support or entertain this conversation anymore. And they're really just looking for somebody to vent to. They're not looking for solutions. This is a place you're going to need to set some type of boundary so there is a natural consequence to their actions. And then anytime you feel exhausted by someone asking for something, that is not normal. It's not normal to be completely like depleted, exhausted. Like, oh my God, if one more person asks me to do something, I'm going to lose my mind. That's when you know that you got to like take a step back, take a second of me time, find a way to bring yourself down, because as we talked about, your feeling, your responsibility, it's your responsibility to act on that and create that time and space for yourself before responding. But if you're at that brink of exhaustion, some boundary needs to be created. Or the example I put here is your coworker starts complaining the second they get in the door. This is actually a personal example. This man that I sat next to for more than a year, he would come in and just be so angry at the whole world. I didn't know what was wrong. And eventually when he would just start complaining and asking for validation, I would have to stop listening. I just could not engage. You could tell I wasn't as engaged. So over time, he started venting to the other person in the other cubicle. It was effective. It took time, but creating these boundaries and natural consequences does work, and it doesn't have to be confrontational. Now, the elements of a boundary. It's made up of 4 pieces. The first is the actual request, physical, mental, or emotional. And request is kind of a weird word, but everything asks something of us. And then our choice to say yes or no to engage physically, mentally, or emotionally is moving us towards or away from whatever that thing is. And then there's the person or thing doing the requesting and your relationship with them. And then there is how you feel given the request and the person and the relationship. And then there's how you actually respond. So how to comprehend each of these individual pieces and then still respond respecting your highest self. So the request, this is the fact. This is what they're actually asking for. This is the resource that's being requested. That's the fact. The person or thing doing the requesting, your relationship, this is the story. This is a story you start creating about what it means if you do or don't give them this resource and what you know about them from the past. And you start going down this rabbit hole as opposed to just looking at the situation. And then there's the feeling, naturally, that's the feeling. And then how you respond needs to be a direct response to the facts. You're not going off of everything you've ever known about this person. You are deciding if in this moment, in this request, you do have the resources to meet whatever the request is. And that is a more logical way to set boundaries. Setting boundaries is scary when it's emotional, but setting boundaries is not emotional. It is logical. It is, I literally only have these resources, and this is what I can give, and this is what I cannot give. And it's logical, and it's a matter of resources, not emotion. Now, the 4-step boundary method that you can walk through in any situation where you feel like you need to set a boundary. The first is to understand the situation. And this means really have an honest conversation with yourself about what line is being crossed or what resource is being asked for. This is fact-based, not story-based. And then you are going to reflect. So you're going to ask yourself, what feeling am I having that I'm responsible for in this situation? And then what solution can I come up with to address this thing? And based on those feelings and the solutions, you're going to take whatever action it may be. And I just put this in here because this is hard for a lot of people to really internalize, but you are not a hero for suffering in silence and resenting the things in your life, but doing them anyways. You have to respect your resources. So that action you're going to take is going to be limiting that exposure, creating natural consequences, and making verbally fact-based I statement requests. So letting somebody know, I am feeling this way, that way, not you made me feel blah, 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 because nobody can make you feel anything. It's your feelings, your responsibility. I statement, I need this one, whatever it may be. And being in the habit of doing that and not assuming anything, assuming anyone can read your mind or that they even know they're exploiting your resource. And then you're just going to repeat. So you just need to understand what the situation is. Okay, how am I feeling? All right. And how am I going to respond? Okay. And then you just consistently take that action, and people might try to push back, especially if they're not used to you saying no, but it's just a matter of consistency. And eventually they begin to understand that that relationship is for certain things and it is not for other things. And although that might seem like, oh, well, I don't want to suddenly be selfish. My identity has always been really selfless, and my identity is always being there for people. And when people tell you enough of the time, you're always there when I need you, like you're the most selfless friend, it can become an identity. And then you don't want to feel like, well, who am I if I'm not those things? Am I suddenly selfish? And you're not. It's just you reevaluating what resources you have in this season of your life and then distributing them differently. And anybody who doesn't understand that does not have your best interest in mind, because when you're doing this, you are having your explicit best interest in mind. You're making decisions based off that, and that's extremely reasonable. And people who can't believe that suddenly you're rationing your resources because you know you need to, that's a completely different conversation you'll need to have. And that is the end of the boundaries portion of this module. So thank you very much for listening. And are there any questions about boundaries?
Same thing, guys. If you want to unmute yourselves, feel free to just ask away. You can also put it in the chat and I can ask. That was awesome. I thought that was great. You guys, we talk a lot about ownership, and this is like the ultimate example of that. I loved the question of asking yourself, is this getting me closer to or further from my goals? And I think that's a really great way to reframe it and bring it back to the thing that really matters. Is sure, you can say yes to all the things that are gonna put demands on your time. Are you willing to accept that those things are going to put your goals further away or make them unattainable? And as an aside, if you have done the managing limiting beliefs training where I talk about CTFARs, this is a very similar idea, that the situation itself is neutral, not good or bad, it just is. That's the facts that Emily was talking about. And then you assign the thought and the feeling to it that ends up dictating what you do and the results you get. So if you haven't looked at that in a while, pull that up as well, because they're very aligned. So any questions, feel free to ask them. Emily, how can people get in touch with you on social media or follow you wherever you are, if they have other questions or just want to kind of absorb more of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I am right now just utilizing Instagram, and then I use Facebook, but mostly it's just reposts from Instagram. So feel free to reach out to me on that. I'm in the process of designing a website, but I'm not the techiest, so that's en route. But yeah, feel free to reach out via that. I'll attach links to that to the list of go-to responses that I'll send you guys. And yeah, if there's anything else, I know you'll have access to this. I can send you the slides themselves because it's a lot of content really quickly. So I'll send it to you in case anybody wants just a freeze frame of something. And yeah, I'm happy to support any of this with additional content or worksheets.
You are amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording, and then if any of you have questions you want to ask offline, you can do that as well.
Perfect.